back to the show. My name's Merlin Fulcher. Today is Tuesday, the 19th of May. So we've gone through some pretty extraordinary things in the recent months since we've had to deal with this coronavirus crisis and this lockdown, and a lot of things which we basically come to believe weren't possible have effectively been proven to be possible. So that, for example, includes temporarily nationalising the railways, announcing that the NHS can have all of the funding that it possibly needs, building hospitals at short notice, and paying something what we now is looking like 7 million people in the workforce being paid directly by the government. So a lot of things that a year or two we were told weren't possible are suddenly possible. And so I really want to sort of build on this theme of making the impossible possible, because we're living through a kind of era-defining moment where new assumptions are being formed and old ones cast aside. Now, so I got thinking about this, and I think one of the big topics in architecture and the built environment is offices, because right now a lot of people who work in offices, not everyone's a big fan of offices, some people love them, a lot of us are working from home. Now, a bit of a full disclosure here, I've worked in offices for about 10 years, or I've worked in a job associated with offices for 10 years, but for about 6 of them I've actually worked from home, and I really enjoy working from home actually, but I also really enjoy occasionally going into the office and going out with my laptop to amazing cafes and other places and museums, etc., where I can work. So I think this present situation where I'm stuck working at home all the time is actually a bit more difficult than what I've been used to, but I'm a massive advocate of working from home if it works for the person, and everybody's different, and that's totally normal. Um, but things are changing, and there's some really interesting research that's been done on it. Now, I wanted to show this slide, and this is the Bloomberg building in the City of London. This is a project by Foster and Partners, and it is actually a pretty stunning office complex. It's huge. It's also a building that's very big on the ground, and it's not a skyscraper. And obviously, we associate the centre of the city with skyscrapers. This absolutely isn't a skyscraper. But what it is it's a media campus for the company Bloomberg, who are a big media company who do some excellent articles about all kinds of things. And what exists in this building is space for about 6,700 office workers. And if you ever get a chance to go in here and have a look around and go on some kind of architectural tour, I fully recommend it. The interior is amazing. What's interesting about this building is that 2 years ago it won the Sterling Prize, which is this prize which used to be sort of screened live on Channel 4, a bit like the Turner Prize, and effectively it's the biggest prize in architecture in the United Kingdom. So effectively what this said in 2018 is that this is the sort of pinnacle of architecture. This is the biggest achievement in the built environment that's happened. Now, and in many ways, yeah, I mean, it's a £1 billion office building. I mean, it's unbelievably impressive from the outside and from the inside, and it does enhance the City of London. When you wander around it, you really do feel like you're in a great place and a great city. So there's a lot of things that work about it. It's been criticised for various other things, but I'm just going to look specifically at the idea of like, what's this building being used for right now? Because obviously Bloomberg's still producing loads of material, but also, like every other company, people are having to work from home. Now, having been inside this building, a lot of the circulation spaces, a lot of the lobby, the giant statement entrance areas and other things, it's perfectly rational that those could work in a socially distancing scenario where everybody's 2 meters apart. But desks themselves also need to be 2 meters apart. Now, there's some really interesting research that's been done by Colliers, who are a big consultancy firm, and what they've done is they've said that they estimate that 11.8 million people in Britain work at desks, right? That's a lot of people. So that's a sixth of the nation effectively at desks and living that kind of desk lifestyle. Now, what they estimate is that 6 out of 10 of these desks will be unusable while the 2 meter rule remains in place, meaning 7.8 million people will still have to work at home. So that's an awful lot of people. And obviously this 2 meter rule isn't necessarily something that's going to last forever, but it is something that we think might last, well, frankly, for months, if not a year, and possibly even once we have a kind of vaccine and other things which allow us to proceed to a sort of level of normality, we still probably will need to rethink our public spaces and workspaces to be as healthy as possible when it comes to the transmission of potential diseases, right? It's going to have a lasting impact on office design, potentially. So that's an awful lot of people working from home. But then they also went a bit further and they surveyed about 4,000 people, and they found that 73% of them found that their productivity had gone up when working from home. Now, look, I would say I am one of those people who I like an office, I like chatting to people, but when it comes to getting stuff done, I just want a quiet space where I can just put on some music and just work and just get those tasks done, just absolutely steamroller through it all, and then forget about it, go out for a swim or go to the gym or go for a cycle or cook some nice food. You know, that's how I like to work. But I really like spending time in an office environment with people, but I feel like I need more control, right? So what we're seeing here is a lot of these people, 73% of them, possibly a bit like me, and they've said that they found their productivity was either the same or higher working from home. Now, obviously, that's not, you know, the sole measure of human or social worth. We've moved beyond that. We're not just going to measure everything in GDP, right? So there's more in this data, and they're saying that 76% of people also thought their work-life balance had improved. And you know, you probably heard what I've just been saying. I sound like someone who thinks they've got a happy work-life balance. So all of this stuff would suggest that offices change, and I think that that's interesting because, for example, in the last week, we've had this announcement that another skyscraper in the City of London has won planning permission. So this is a building by Parry architect, who's done lots of buildings in the City of London. The building we're discussing is called 50 Fenchurch Street, and it's this one in the foreground of the image with this kind of green spine in it. And this is a 36-story office tower. It includes I've got to check the notes for this. It includes a space for the the 500-year-old cloth workers company, 62,000 square meters of office space, and some new public spaces at ground level. So this is an awful lot of development, right? It's won planning permission, and you know, if you're an architect or developer, the stage where you win planning permission is where the champagne is flowing. You know, you're very happy. This will have effectively made that land worth a lot more money than it had been before. So this is a kind of conventional achievement in development and architecture terms. But the question is, how do you proceed with a sort of planning consent like this? You can build this building now, but what kind of manner of occupation does it then have when it's used? And these are just I don't know the answers, but I think it's fascinating. I think that we will still have office towers being built in the City of London and all around the world, and we'll have residential towers being built as well. But it'd be interesting to see what kind of discussions happen in the months ahead about possible design tweaks, but also about how these spaces are occupied and what the kind of commercial offer is. Because people like offices, you get an amazing view, it's very prestigious. Um, you know, does it become even more of a premium product than it had been before in terms of real estate? I'm not quite sure, but it'd be interesting to look at that. Now, that's in a commercial situation, so the people who are concerned with this, they can make commercial decisions about what happens next in terms of that, coming back to the beginning of the program, making the impossible possible. So it'd be very interesting to see how they react to it. But I think this also is quite relevant when we think about a major public project. So it's been something that's been discussed for years, but basically we know that the Houses of Parliament, the stunning building on the riverfront in Westminster, which houses the House of Lords and the House of Commons, is in a pretty poor state, and it contains basically a lot of asbestos, but it's also basically thought to be at risk of some kind of major fire or flood or bits of stone falling off it. And what would you expect for a building that's now over 150 years old and pretty much hasn't had much spent maintaining it at all? It's made out of stone, which is a building material which does require a bit of effort to keep it in check, but also it has various sort of outdated systems within it. Now, you know, what happened a year ago? We had the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris burned down. I mean, that was a horrific thing to witness, very traumatizing for everybody that saw those visuals, not least, obviously, everybody in France and in Paris, right? A few years earlier, you had the Battersea Art Centre Grand Hall burned down, something that's been beautifully rebuilt by Howard Tompkins architects. Um, fires happen, right? And so the last thing anybody would want is anything bad to happen to the Houses of Parliament as a building, right? It would be absolutely tragic. So it's really, really important that this building is restored as quickly as possible. And so within this logic, it was set out a plan to restore the building and spent about £4 billion doing it, which obviously before this crisis sounded like a lot of money. But now we're spending, well, it is looking like it's going to be 300 billion just to pay for all the kind of emergency measures that have been in place this year, let alone what's going to have to happen if this crisis drags on, right? So 4 billion doesn't sound like a huge amount, but also the entire kind of premise of the project. So basically the idea is this building, the Houses of Parliament, has got about 650 MPs in, plus their staff, plus various others. So a few thousand, well, I'd imagine more than 1,000, maybe 2,000 people in the building at any time. And so in order to rebuild that building, you can basically turn it into a construction site, but then you need another building where those number of people are doing all the activities they traditionally did. So the cost of the project, this 4 billion cost of the project, was not just rebuilding the Houses of Parliament, turning it into a construction site for what they estimated would be 8 years, but it was also to build a whole kind of replica Parliament next to the Parliament, where all of those activities could go over for the duration of the project. So it meant basically building an entire new legislature and rebuilding the legislature, which was in trouble as a building, right? Um, but then this crisis happened, and then you had things like this. So this is the House of Commons during a session of some kind of some kind of debate. It's not Prime Minister's question time, but what's going on here is you can see, as we discussed in this program before, is that it's being carefully laid out with some not so subtle design interventions to make sure that these people are distanced from each other. And you can't see in this photo, but there's also some video screens, and that allows other people, MPs, in their constituency offices or at home, to beam in to the discussion. And so what this has done is it's taken a room that was full, completely packed full of people, not just at this level, but above with the public gallery and the press gallery, to being a room which is pretty empty of people. And if this room's empty, you can imagine most of the other rooms in the Houses of Parliament are empty. The situation is going to go on for months, and it could possibly go on for years, although the leader of the House of Commons, Jacob Rees-Mogg, is pushing to bring everybody back. Coincidentally, while he's trying to make this push, there was a big announcement today, and that is that a review body is now looking at ways to possibly save money on this very restoration project, particularly in light with Covid-19. So you're looking at a situation where the building's massively underused and could be massively underused for quite a while, and they're saying, hey, you know what, guys, maybe we could just take this extraordinary few years while we get to grips with this disease crisis, and use that extraordinary few years just to rebuild the building and in as a giant construction site, and then put this tiny handful of MPs in a tent outside, a bit like those school pop-up tents we saw by Curl Latourelle Head yesterday in my last show. So basically, there's a way cheaper option, and I think that's a bit, in a way, it's a bit sad because here in this render you can see what would have been the temporary debating chamber. And this is designed by a practice called AHMM, Major London Architect, and what they designed, I think, is a really beautiful alternative House of Commons. Controversially, it would have to have been built on the site of a Grade 2 listed building by Whitfield Partners, which is considered a sort of post-modern major achievement of its time. So this project wasn't without some controversy, but if you were to strip away that controversial element, I would say that there was some kind of excitement in the idea of creating a modern, accessible, safe, and I think reasonably beautiful debating chamber. But then again, there's no point in building this whole thing potentially if it's only going to be used for 8 years, and if during those 8 years, many of those years, parliamentarians won't be able to sit anywhere near each other because of an ongoing social distancing restriction. So that's the kind of logic that's going through this review body right now. And I would say that while that logic is all perfectly rational, it possibly overlooks the fact that actually, if we had years and years of Parliament not having lots of people in, that actually kind of robs us of a bit of our democracy. And in this image here, it's really beautiful because you can see all the people up on these press and public galleries, and it looks like there could be a school group, or it could be people who've come to watch a really important debate about something that's important to them. And I think that that's sad, and that's a really beautiful part of the kind of democratic culture, which for all its other failings, it did have this lovely opportunity for people to get together, to shout at each other, to sometimes be silly, but sometimes be really good. So I would say that while you can possibly see that they're being quite clever, they're saving a bit of money. Sometimes you think this is sort of dreaming the impossible, but in a slightly different way, and we might have to be careful how we dream the impossible. But I'm an optimist, and I think interesting things will come from it. Now, the final point I wanted just to discuss at the end of this program is to do with residential property sales. And what's happened in the last week or so is that the government's basically said that you can sell houses again, and this is probably great news for some people, probably totally irrelevant for other people, effectively it means that this what is basically quite an over-egged market in places like London can resume its activity. We might see some surprising drops. Some estate agents have basically said that buyers are being much more keen to push for discounts. So this could filter through some interesting statistics in the coming months, and I'll be keen to discuss them on this show. One thing that I've seen is that mentioned is that one of the property portals, Search Smartly, has started listing houses with the air pollution score, which is absolutely fascinating. So currently, if you look to buy a house, it will have all kinds of details about whether it's freehold or leasehold and what its energy performance certificate is and all that kind of jazz, right? But now they're going to add an extra layer of detail, which is air pollution. You think, okay, air pollution, obviously everybody wants to breathe fresh air. However, during this coronavirus crisis, we've had some really, really interesting studies that have basically shown that the air pollution, the more air pollution that exists in an area, the worse the impact the disease is, right? And this is absolutely terrifying. And if you look at northern Italy, it's very industrial, very developed region. They had a lot of air pollution, and the disease sadly was hit really hard in North Italy, but also in Britain. Right here in London, in the Midlands, in the Northwest, it's very industrialised. We have air pollution. We have a lot of cars, and so this had a real impact. And so people are thinking more and more about how they can plan their life around this potentially. And I just wanted to show this is it's not an accurate map. Oh, sorry, this is an accurate map. It's not a current map. So this is a something from before the coronavirus crisis, and it shows air pollution in London. Effectively, the dark red is bad, yellow is moderate, and then blue is good. So if you look in the bottom left corner, something like Richmond Park and Wimbledon Common, mostly blue. They're big spaces that cars can't get through for the most part. In the centre, you're looking at some red lines on the major streets like Park Lane, like Buckingham Palace Road, like looks like Knightsbridge, Kensington High Street, and then over in a place like Elephant and Castle, the Embankment, Euston Road. Those are really polluted places. So you cycle along them, you know it, right? If your office is along them, sadly, you're being exposed to it. But also, look at all these spaces in between those major roads where this pollution was having an impact on the quality of air. So I used to live in Battersea. I can see that the area I used to live in had pretty yellowish amount of pollution there, which is kind of annoying because nobody really wants to live in an area with air pollution. And various studies have found that actually you're more likely to live in an area with residential area with air pollution if you were from a low income background or from if you're black or minority ethnic. So this is a really bad situation. And what I would say is certainly now we know that this disease is exacerbated by air pollution. What we need to say is we need to dream we need to make possible what we previously thought had been impossible, and just say, look, we can't have this air pollution in cities. We cannot have people being disproportionately affected by air pollution just because of their socioeconomic background or their race. This is outrageous, right? And it goes the same for residential and workplaces. All those people who have to work in vehicles, bus drivers, who are trying to reduce the number of cars on the road, they're breathing in all this pollution. Ambulance drivers, people doing the small number of actual valid car use in a city like this, they were getting really horribly polluted by it. So I'd say let's dream the impossible. Let's continue that theme, and let's really think about how the city can be as free as possible from air pollution, and that's going to mean obviously lots more walking, lots more cycling, but also political willpower to make those things happen. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be back with more discussions very soon.